Please welcome our panelists for this session. Gary Crawford, Vice President of International Affairs, Public Affairs Department, Veolia. Rachel Goldstein, Global Sustainability Director, Mars. And Mikkel de Smet, Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is indeed Michiel de Smet, and I work for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation is a charity that aims to accelerate the transition towards a circular economy. Before we start with the session, I would like to warmly invite you to ask questions, because after a couple of short presentations, we will go into a discussion for which your questions are very welcome. As said, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation aims to accelerate the transition to a circular economy and works in different domains. A couple of years ago, together with the World Economic Forum and McKinsey & Company, we started looking into plastics and plastic packaging. Looking at the current system, we realized that plastics is a material that brings many benefits. It's lightweight, it's a versatile material, it preserves our food, but at the same time, the system in which this material operates is broken. When you look at it from an economic point of view, we realize that every year we lose in between 80 and 120 billion US dollars because we do not succeed in capturing the material value of plastic packaging after we've been using it only once. But also looking from an environmental point of view, we discovered that up to 1/3 of plastic packaging leaks into the environment after having been used only once. In a business-as-usual scenario, this could lead to more plastics than fish in the oceans by weight by 2050. Hence, I'm also very happy to see that later on today there's a session on marine litter by Jenna Jambak and Kostas Velis, amongst others. Looking into the current system, we realize it's a typical take, make, dispose system. Taking resources, making something out of it, and disposing of it. It's a typical linear system. And whichever industry you look into, such a system brings drawbacks. We not only looked into the current system, but also formulated a positive future, rethinking the future of plastics in line with circular economy principles. It's about harnessing the benefits we see nowadays while achieving better economic and environmental outcomes. We called it the new plastics economy. Having studied the current system, having developed a future system, which has been outlined in a report published at the World Economic Forum in 2016, we also started thinking, how can we take the entire value chain with us and start moving from where we are nowadays to a future circular economy? That's why we launched a year ago the New Plastics Economy Initiative. Together with the entire value chain, plastic packaging value chain, we're working towards unstoppable momentum towards the new plastics economy. As you can see, we truly are covering the entire plastic packaging value chain, going from a plastic producer like Dow Chemicals, DuPont, Borealis, over packaging producers like Amcor and Constantia, obviously the big brands like Mars, Unilever, P&G, further down retailers, Kaufland, Lidl, Marks & Spencer, municipalities and big waste management companies like Veolia and Suez, as well as smaller recyclers. And spanning this entire value chain is crucial, because cross-value chain collaboration is at the heart of the system change we're looking for. We actually have 5 pillars. 5 pillars that need to be in place in order to get to the system change we're looking for. First of all, it's about dialogue. It's a dialogue mechanism where we bring together all the actors of the value chain. Secondly, it's about the Global Plastics Protocol. It's a common language, common definitions, which allow us, and us in this case is in the entire value chain, to speak the same language and avoid fragmentation. Thirdly, it's about innovation. Innovation in business models, in former design of your plastic packaging, in the material choice, but also innovation in sorting technology and reprocessing technologies. Fourthly, is about evidence base. It's about creating a better understanding of how the material of plastic packaging flows into our society and economy, and what the impact is on our society and our economy. And finally, it's about stakeholder engagement. Nearly everyone on this globe touches plastic packaging on a daily basis. So obviously, we'll have to consult all those people when we start moving the system. In the past year, in particular, we focused on designers and innovators on the one hand, and policymakers on the other, especially given the fact that the European Union is developing a plastic strategy. As part of this fourth pillar, we published a second report at the World Economic Forum last January. It describes 3 strategies, 3 transition strategies for the global plastic packaging value chain. We did this segment-by-segment analysis of the plastic packaging applications, which resulted into the following. For 30% of current plastic packaging put on the market, we'll need fundamental redesign and innovation. We're talking here about small format plastic packaging like sweet wraps, tear-offs, lids. We're talking about multi-material packaging, which is great to preserve your food, but difficult to recycle, both from a technical and an environmental point of view. We're also talking about uncommon packaging materials and highly nutrient-contaminated packaging, such as fast food packaging. For 20% of plastic packaging currently put onto the market, reuse offers an economic attractive alternative. And then for the remaining 50%, recycling is an economically attractive opportunity, given that we drastically improve quality and economics. Those 3 strategies guide the steps and the initiatives we take within our broader initiative, the New Plastics Economy. And it's on those topics that we take with us our participant companies. It's with great pleasure to introduce one of them, Mars in this case, so I would like to ask Rachel Goldstein to come in.
Great, thank you, Michiel. All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is really my great pleasure to be here on behalf of Mars to talk about our work in the New Plastics Economy Initiative. And personally, it's been great to see a lot of friends and colleagues from my landfill gas days from EPA, so that's just an added bit of extra fun for me here today. Okay, so who is Mars? So we are a family-owned, privately held business with more than a century of history making diverse products and offerings, services for people and the pets that people love. I think most people are familiar with our chocolate brands and associate that with the Mars name, but we're also a large pet care company. We have food that's non-confection, non-chocolate, and we also have a drinks business of coffee and teas. With almost $35 billion in sales, we're headquartered in McLean, Virginia, which is not that far from here. And then we're also operating in more than 80 countries. We're guided by our 5 principles: quality, responsibility, mutuality, efficiency, and freedom. And that really inspires our associates, frames the way we do our business, as well as how we look at our sustainability program. And so we'll talk about that. We just launched our new Sustainable in a Generation plan earlier this month. And really we do this because we know the world is facing significant challenges. And those are business challenges as well, but also business opportunity and the responsibility for us to help engage in solving those problems. And we look at 3 interconnected ambitions as part of this plan. Healthy planet, and that looks at greenhouse gas, land and water, and really how we'll reduce our environmental impacts in line with what the science says is necessary to keep the planet at 2 degrees C. Thriving people, again, also looking far into our extended supply chain in terms of significantly improving the working lives of 1 million people and enabling them to thrive, which we think also helps our business to thrive. And thirdly, nourishing well-being. And that's looking at the innovation pipeline, it's looking at health and well-being, food safety, and again, looking at how do we have people and their pets live healthier lives. Okay, so in that Healthy Planet pillar, we have our zero waste to landfill goals, but we also have our packaging sustainability work. And if you remember the slide with the brands that we had, it gave you a snapshot into all the different packaging formats that we have and the challenges that they pose, right? So looking at how do we optimize things at the beginning of their lives, but also how do we find solutions for the package once the consumer is done with the product. And to get into a little history of how we came to where we are in packaging sustainability, we had our first generation of packaging goals in 2011. And like many other companies and what sort of was the prevailing tide at that time, we looked at weight reduction in our packaging, we looked at recycled content, and we looked at recyclability. And what we've learned over the years in terms of trying to reduce the weight of packaging and optimizing, in some cases we're able to go ahead and downgauge some of the packaging using the same structure. But in other cases, we move from things like glass, we move from things like metals, things that are easily recyclable, to less material, to the flexible packaging that we see today. And as we know that they do have good environmental benefits from, using less material, being lighter in transport, we still find that there are challenges for end of life. We've also looked at deforestation in our pulp and paper supply chain, but most recently, as we've been hearing in the last day or two here, is the Jenna Jembeck work in terms of ocean plastics. Right? We started following that science and the growing body of science in that area quite closely, how it relates to potential regulatory frameworks, and just again, how do we look at our packaging in terms of trying to prevent ocean litter. And what we came up with in launching new goals earlier this year is that we see that we still look to work towards 100% recyclability of our packaging by 2025. We're also partnering with others to improve recovery, and that's again where we see our work with the New Plastics Economy Initiative, focusing on optimizing packaging in a way that reduces our carbon footprint throughout its life cycle. That Healthy Planet set of metrics that we have, carbon, land, and water, carbon is the most material for us in our packaging. And then also looking to address deforestation in our pulp and paper supply chain. And so building on the last session here, when we look at those three strategies, we don't have a whole lot of our packaging formats that are in that 50%. We find from a food safety standpoint, reuse is also a bit of a challenge for us. But the vast majority of our primary packaging will start to fall in that 30%. And so what the New Plastics Economy Initiative has done is then broken that 30% of fundamental redesign into 4 other buckets. So we're looking at small formats, right? So individual serving sizes, if you think back to our nourishing well-being ambition, we offer a range of calorie counts, but that also means we have small packs. And whether it's paper or a monoplastic, it still means it's not recyclable based on its size. We're also looking at multi-materials, pouches and other multi-layer laminates. We also have some parts of our portfolio with the nutrient contamination in terms of our coffee and tea single-serve packs. And then, of course, we also have the uncommon materials, things of PVC, polystyrene. But we really look at this work here to help frame some of our internal conversations about where our packaging issues lie. And as you can see in the last stat in here, where it talks about plastic by weight is 30%, but by actual impression and piece is really about 50%. So when we start thinking about these small packs, and I think this is an audience that knows that it takes a lot of small packs to make up a pound, let alone a ton, we have to start thinking a little bit about how we look at redesign. And then I will turn it over to Gary for the next part of the value chain.
Great.
There you go.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased that it's filling up very well and that you're here and interested to learn about the New Plastics Economy Initiative. It's a very interesting initiative, as you've heard a little bit before, and now I'll tell you from a Veolia perspective. So first slide, just some background on our corporate strategy. About 3 years ago, we rebranded ourselves and went with the tagline, Resourcing the World. And what we see is within our activities, if you don't know what we do, Veolia, with 163,000 employees, is providing water, waste, and energy management services and design. And through that, by working in these subjects, what we designated is that we're working to really provide and developing access to resources, Also preserving resources and replenishing those as well. So this is what we're set out to do, and it really shows our commitment to the circular economy because that's where we think our future is. So this next slide, it actually just shows our network of European plastic recycling facilities. I won't get into a lot of detail, but we've recently expanded and we're moving, and we see that Europe is quite interesting because also there's a regulatory conditions that will help the development of this activity. So this first line shows really what our traditional historic activities were in terms of plastics, really going from collection right on through to sorted plastics and selling trading bales. What we would like to do now is really move faster and work towards being a major player in the plastics recycling industry, integrating from collection, now going right on through to compounding and pelletizing. So we're doing that now at some of our facilities for different polymers. And what we really want to be is seen as a specialist in terms of secondary raw materials and providing secondary raw materials, and we'll continue to advance on that through our continuous innovation and work on developing the technologies in this area. And so here we heard a little bit about this already, is in terms of the challenges. We hear the very impressive economic possibilities, but we're held back. And when we look at this, we're held back because we see things like, for example, just increasing complexity of polymers and additives, which makes it challenging for recycling. Also, insufficient collection capacity, or the fact of the volatile oil prices. So we see a number of situations that are really quite challenging and can be real stumbling blocks for us. And with that, we look at it in a different way, that when you heard the numbers of the lost value of the plastics today and what Michael just described, you see that we really need to turn this into opportunities. And that's what we're hoping to do, and that's what this initiative is helping us to do. You saw this slide and the 3 strategies to transform the global plastic packaging market. And we see the one that we're obviously very interested in addition to the 50% above, but looking at what with the recycling and radically improved economics and quality have shown to be able to, if we can move in that direction, we can really have a significant impact on managing the plastic waste through recycling at better economic conditions and also environmental outcomes, notably greenhouse gas emissions, and as Michael mentioned, the leakage of the plastics into the oceans. So what I do have now is just this last slide, and amongst the subjects that we were talking about, and the 50%, what we came up with was, within the initiative, was priority actions to really enhance the uptake, quality, and economics of recycling. And we see, I'll just go through these quickly, but you see implementing design changes in plastic packaging to improve the recycling quality and economics, and that's a key area, probably the key area. And also looking at harmonizing and adapting best practices for collection and sorting systems. And those two together, we're right now working on and exploring the best way to come up with a global plastics protocol that will really work to converge the design and the aftercare infrastructure to be more efficient. And so that work is underway and is one of the projects that's going on. Then scaling up high-quality recycling process, obviously. Explore the potential of material markers to increase sorting yields and quality. And in this area, we have a program that there's pilot projects, and there's actually about 9 pilot projects already underway. And one is on the markers and watermarks, and really exploring how they could be best used in the plastics for automated recycling infrastructure. And so this project is really quite interesting and underway. Also develop and deploy innovative sorting mechanisms for post-consumer flexible films. There's also a pilot project on that is ongoing. and then boosting the demand for recycled plastics through voluntary commitments or policy instruments, and explore other policy measures to support the recycling. Now here, what we've seen, especially in Europe, there's an ongoing work going towards the European Circular Economy Package. At this time, there's a strategy that's being worked on by the European Commission. And what's really great is that they're interfacing regularly with the New Plastics Economy team to have input. And they've really taken the information that's coming from the analysis and reports that have been done and integrating that into the program going forward. And we see also there's others in that area in terms of really looking for policy support. And then lastly, just deploying adequate collection and sorting infrastructure where it doesn't exist today. So those are our main categories, and I think I'll stop there and just say thank you for your attention. And we're now going to move into where I know you've all been entering numbers of questions, and so we're looking forward to receiving those. So we're going to get started with the first round of questions. We need this.
Thank you, Gary. Is my mic on? Yes. Before we actually turn to the questions from the audience, I would like to ask two questions, both to Rachel and Gary. At the heart of the New Plastics Economy Initiative is cross-value chain collaboration. We truly believe that we'll have to make improvements both on the upstream design of plastic packaging and the downstream collection, sorting, and reprocessing. So working together with Mars, with Veolia, is an essential part of the initiative. Now, my question to you would be, why did you join the initiative? Why is it valuable to Mars or Veolia to join such an initiative? Rachel, please.
Great, thank you. As you mentioned, we think that cross-value chain collaboration is absolutely critical. Internally, when we talk about the recyclability goal that we set, we look at three areas of that, design and materials being the first and what we have the most control over, infrastructure being a key component, as well as the consumer, right? So, ultimately, how do we make it easy for the consumer to recycle where we can? But the infrastructure piece is something that we don't have an expertise at. We need the waste management industry, and then we also need, from a design and materials standpoint, upstream in terms of those who provide the resins and those who make them into packaging. And certainly my pitch internally regarding the New Plastics Economy was that value chain collaboration, and that was really necessary.
Thank you. Gary?
Okay. Yes, thank you. And with that question, I mean, we recognize within our company in a number of areas, and especially working on the circular economy, that we really can, it's not things that we can do alone, or it's not one company, it's not one agency, it's really, this is a subject that is it's a systemic, it will require systemic change to really advance and the transition to a circular economy. And so we continue to work directly with companies and trying to help them meet their targets and achievements, but we also recognize that we need to be within that cross-value chain discussion and working together. And this is really a great example of that. And we really feel that this platform is perfect for us because it is very challenging, especially for plastics. And we think that we can really move the cursor by working together and coming up with solutions and really demonstrating through some real projects that really just get some discussions going on these key subjects.
Thank you. Shall we move to one of the questions by the audience? Perhaps the first one, what is a material marker? Very, very quickly, Gary, either you or myself or Rachel. Yeah, I'm happy to quickly share. So you've got, in terms of markers, you can either go for optical markers, which could be something very much like a barcode, but then they could be either very visual on the label, or they could be in the material, or you have a chemical marker, which is an additive you add to your polymer mix, which then encrypts certain information. And the idea behind it is that you create additional transparency throughout the value chain. So by putting the information in the material, either as a visual or a chemical marker, you actually know what's in your packaging, but you can also add information on the product or additional information for the consumer, so there could be more interaction. And then finally, at the very end of the value chain, when it comes to sorting the material out, obviously you've got the possibility of making a very granular sorting of the stream that comes in. First application, for example, could be food versus non-food grade, but then you can or could go in theory much further. The question at the moment is which of the different technologies that are currently out there is viable, both from an operational and economic point of view, and then obviously how would you go about implementing it and ensuring that there's sufficient scale to make it viable.
All right, so there's a question here about concrete examples of what Mars is doing to redesign packaging. And I'd say there are two things that we have worked on in recent years. So our drinks business, we've looked to remove the aluminum layer of a multi-layer laminate as a way of reducing the carbon footprint. And we have a pilot that we ran in the previous year, and again, we're trying to determine what the market viability is looking at a bio-base for a Mars wrapper that we piloted in 3 markets in Europe. So that is one example where we're trying within R&D to pilot some other options. That particular pack had potato waste starch as part of it and PLA in terms of looking at different materials. And then again, we're evaluating whether the sort of the larger ability to be able to bring that to market outside of a pilot.
And I'll just mention, because it's quite recent, and I'm not surprised to see that it's on the question list, but it's about China's restricting the types and amounts of plastics it's importing after years of being the largest purchaser of it. Will that disrupt the new plastics economy? My personal opinion is that no, that will not disrupt the new plastics economy initiative. I think that what we're seeing there, we're in a global markets, and we have the biggest player who is accepting plastic waste and bales, saying that they want higher quality coming into their borders and being provided to them. And I think that in the short term, with an announcement like that, it can definitely cause disruption. But I would hope that in turn of time would also lead to rethinking and working towards improving and upgrading the quality, which is some of the things that we're working on here, is to be able to do that. And so it will take some time. There'll be some difficult periods, but I think that that's just a move in the right direction for recognition of the need for quality materials.
Yeah,
yes.
Please go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. Well, if you have a pressing question, so please.
They're coming in through the screen. That was.
They're okay. Go ahead.
My question is, so while I see a lot of great initiatives from your companies that are working on reducing what might go in and making things more recyclable, there's already a vast quantity, particularly in our oceans and waterways, of plastics and materials that have accumulated over the years. And the question is, are your companies at all, in some way, anyway, helping to address that, either financially or through some capacity you might have in terms of organizing or coordinating, across the spectrum? Is there any toe in the water there?
I'm happy to take it first.
You want to start?
Yeah, so, we're not a private company. We are a charity, so I'll leave it up to private companies to add additional comments. But from our point of view, when we look at plastics, as said before, we see the benefits of plastic packaging, but at the same time, we clearly see that the current system is broken. And as you pointed out, one of the clear drawbacks is ocean plastics. What we bring to the table is a positive vision, an alternative future for plastics, so we can harness the benefits we see nowadays, but at the same time get to better economic and environmental outcomes, hence drastically reducing leakage of plastics. Again, what we bring is this vision, is this system change. So we work together with the entire value chain, whether it's private business, municipalities, or NGOs, to move the entire system. At the same time, as you point out, obviously plastics are in the oceans and something has to be done with it. But in our view, different actors within our societal landscape have different roles to play. So from that point of view, no, we're not really involved in direct clean beach hub activities, for example, but we truly believe by bringing this alternative vision and pointing to the drawbacks of the current system, we raise awareness on the topic, which then can fuel into cleanup activities and these like.
And if I can just add to that, is that at Veolia, we feel completely the same way, that our real value will be upstream and working to avoid the leakage of the plastics into the drainage areas and oceans. But what we do recognize is that we also have a water division, and they're working on technologies and activities to clean more of the littoral zones than the really addressing the ocean plastics. But there's work that's going on there. There's a lot of discussion about it. And what we also have is a foundation that has done some work on really getting better ideas of what it's all about, these gyros that are in the oceans, the plastics, what is the quality, what is the granulometry, and really studying it in a better way with many others. So that work is being done. But for the New Plastics Initiative, it's really focused on what Michael has just said.
And I'll add in that similar to both comments about stemming the tide. So in the recyclability goals that we've set, there's a bit of trying to keep things out of both terrestrial waste, which ultimately leads to ocean waste. So that's definitely a big part of what's informed our goal-setting process. But at the same time, we understand and appreciate the efforts that are going to remove plastics out of the ocean. And we've certainly seen some pilot projects where people are taking that and reusing, like I think Method and I think P&G has a pilot project. And as we start to really need to understand a little bit better what we can do in terms of recycled content, in terms of primary packaging in that contacts food. So we are looking at really trying to understand the research there about what it would take to get something at the same level as food contact approved for us to use as a primary package. So that's going to take us some time, though. Mm-hmm.
There's one here. Yep. Businesses, I'll take it. So it says, what motivates businesses to participate in the new plastics economy? Isn't it more expensive than business as usual? Well, I would say today that we're really trying to move away from business as usual and change a number of things. And I think that when we look at it in terms of expense today, you heard earlier, and if you look at the different reports that have come out under the new plastics economy, you see some of the economics, and there's a lot of economic potential, and we see it as that. And so today, the conditions, there's a lot of challenges. The cost gap that exists between virgin and recycled materials makes it quite challenging, because especially as the oil prices decline, it shifts the curves, and the recycling can be more expensive than the virgin, and that makes it very challenging. So we really need to look at if there's some ways in terms of the policy measures that I described before, where we can really look at setting up the incentives that are needed in order to allow to kind of feed the pump and just get the pump started and getting it going, so that there is some incentive to do that. But I think that in terms of the business as usual is what we're trying to work away from.
Yep. And let me add perhaps some more comments. When we look at all the participants we have, and they, as you saw earlier, they actually span the entire value chain. Usually it's a bit of a combination. As Gary was saying, there is the economic opportunity, and many of the leading businesses might have individual projects which can have positive outcomes, but in order to truly capture the entire value of this 80 to 120 billion US dollars of plastic packaging material that is lost to our economy annually, we'll need to work together. And again, I'm talking about cross-value chain collaboration, because we're talking about a systemic stalemate. If you only invest in design of plastic packaging without ensuring that the collection, sorting and recycling is done in a proper way, you're not going to capture the investments here. And vice versa. If you only invest in better sorting and more high-quality recycling, but the design changes every week and is not adapted to your after-use processes, you're not going to capture the value here. So many of the businesses here understand that through such an initiative, you can actually lift the entire system. I think that's the economic opportunity. And then obviously, there's also this notion of a license to operate, if you want. There is an increasing pressure in the regulatory context, or even the wider public. There are different angles within society where it's less tolerated, increasingly so, that your brand shows up on a beach somewhere in Southeast Asia. So especially brands feel that we'll have to tackle this. If we want to keep on selling our products to our consumers, we'll have to rethink the way we get those products to our consumers. So, yeah, that complements Gary's point.
Yeah. Just to add to that, certainly there's a corporate reputation lens that gives you a different set of strategies than if you're looking at a carbon lens. And then we see the science and we see the reporting on terms of plastic in the oceans and on the beaches, and what that also does is it informs the regulatory environment, right? And so when we talk about whether or not it is business as usual and cost parity, what we see in EPR fees in various places are that it is based on weight and volume. And as we lightweight packaging, the funds go down for that, but they're looking at whether or not the costs become based on whether or not something is recyclable. And so if that goes into play, then the cost calculus looks a little bit different, and business as usual does become more expensive.
Yep. Another one, there seems to be a lot of focus on recycling and reduction, but not much regarding reuse. Why isn't reusable packaging being pursued more aggressively? I can speak from a new plastics economy team perspective. So as you saw in the 3 transition strategies, for 20% of current plastic packaging, reuse offers an economically attractive opportunity. And we're talking here about reuse both in a B2C setting and in a B2B setting. In both situations, examples already exist and are already in place, so this is not something that it seems too far-fetched. We are focusing on it, we are talking about it. I guess it depends a bit on the angle you take, and if the person who asked the question feels that at the moment we're talking too much about recycling, then I guess it's more due to the questions and not necessarily due to the vision we have about reuse.
I'll take, there's one, it's a pretty interesting one. Will this transition to a circular economy prioritize more domestic production and processing capacity for plastics? And that's an interesting question. The challenge is always with the quality and quantity and having sufficient quantity of feedstock. And so what ends up happening is in some cases it does need to be treated, or it needs to be managed outside the borders. But I think more and more, if we can really capture all of the plastics and collect and capture, the feedstock would be there and we would have more possibility. And I think countries really should be looking at their material flows to see how much can be kept domestically, because there's lower costs, of course, with that. And but the challenge is really gaining the feedstocks, and really the processing capacities are really going to be dictated by being able to get those volumes in. And so in some cases, we see that those types of facilities may be more regional than country-based, depending on which polymers we're talking about. But an interesting question.
There's a question about plastics back to oil and where does that fit in its commercial viability. And I would say, at least one of the things that the New Plastics Economy Initiative is looking at is a number of pioneer projects. And we have 2 projects that Mars is engaged with regarding essentially almost like a perf of the future, right? So things with mechanical and chemical recycling. There's another one that's reviewing the current state of pyrolysis. And again, whether or not that becomes plastic back to oil versus whether or not you break down to monomer components and reuse circularly that way. These are all things that, some of the technologies have been around for quite some time and have not scaled. So again, trying to reassess some of the viability of that. And there is actually another set of pilot projects in the U.S. Outside of this initiative looking at the energy bag pilot that Dow and Hefty are doing. It was previously the Citrus Heights pilot project where they are essentially taking out everything that doesn't currently get recycled. So they say if you don't bin it, then bag it, and putting it into another bag that is easily retrieved and seen in the incoming streams in the MRF. And many of those are going back to either, at least I think the pilot in California went back to oil, and the one in Omaha is actually going to be part of the fuel mix for a cement kiln. And again, trying to take that and reuse it as energy or oil or some version of component parts rather than putting into a landfill. So that there are some emerging pilots out there, but the commercial viability is still being assessed.
Yep. I also would like to add from a circular economy point of view is that for us it fits within a truly regenerative and restorative economy by design only if you get from plastics back to monomers, which could be via the naphtha stage, but in the end you should get back to monomers and make plastics out of it again. Otherwise, it's just adding a small little loop, and then it's rather some sort of optimized linear model, take, make, dispose model, instead of a truly virtuous circular economy model. So, as Rachel explained, we are definitely exploring this. It has been around for quite some time, so questions about technical feasibility, economic viability are very valid, but it's only obviously by looking into it and understanding how it works and what type of innovation is needed that we can make up our mind on whether that one day will become part of a circular economy for plastics. Oh, I can take another one.
Yeah.
Is biodegradable polymers the answers or a distraction? Quite sure it's a confusion. Whether it's the answer or a distraction, I think it depends a bit on the type of application we're looking at. First of all, let us be clear that when we're talking about bioplastics, we're talking both about bio-based plastics, so plastics which use a renewable feedstock, like plants, for example, and biodegradable plastics, which actually degrade or can be composted. I think bio-based is another story that's about the feedstock and decoupling from fossil feedstock. This question is more about biodegradable plastics. We believe that for selected applications, such as certain food applications or bin liners for organic waste, one could go for the compostability after-use pathway. So that means that you can collect your plastic packaging separately, your biodegradable plastic packaging, as we see here today. I've seen certain bins where you can actually only bin your compostable plastic packaging. But that also means that you need to collect it separately and ensure it gets composted. At that moment, you're not looking for the value of the composted plastic packaging, because there's basically none. You're rather looking for the value of the nutrients that come with that plastic packaging. Often in a food setting, highly nutrient-contaminated packaging can deliver many more nutrients, which is important for other reasons, like soil depletion or food waste. So for those selected applications, biodegradable, or let us be more specific, industrially compostable plastic packaging could play a role. Obviously, as said before, we need to have an infrastructure in place to ensure that we can collect it, so it doesn't become a reason to start littering plastic packaging, which then might end up in the environment anyways, where it won't degrade as quickly as promised in an industrial facility.
I like your term in terms of whether or not it's a confusion versus a distraction. I think there's certainly a lot of work going to find out what we can do in that space. But I'll echo the concern about litter, right? And whether or not the presumption is that, well, if it's degradable, I can just drop it on the ground and it'll kind of go poof, right? And that the reality is something that's degradable on the ground doesn't degrade right away. And whether or not then people will assume that they can throw away a number of other things and litter, and whether or not things end up back in the oceans. So I think it would also require a great deal of consumer education for biodegradable plastics.
Cool. Okay, we're close to the 1-minute warning.
Oh, yes,
So very good questions. Thank you very much. But I'm sure you have many more. Maybe what we'll do is maybe some closing comments, if you could, and
Yep, I think from our perspective, one of the core elements of the New Plastics Economy Initiative is cross-value chain collaboration. If we want to move the plastic packaging value chain, we'll have to work both on the upstream design of your plastic packaging and the downstream collection, sorting and recycling.
Yeah, no, and again, for us to be able to achieve the goals of which we've set in terms of our packaging sustainability, it is something, and you'll probably hear this from many panels throughout the week, is that there isn't any one group or company or place in the supply chain that can do this alone, that there are a lot of interrelated factors, and that we do find partnerships incredibly valuable in order to make progress.
And I would just say that we need to be working, the sector should really be working towards making this the industry it should be. And it's industrial, and we need to develop it that way. And there's a lot of work to be done, but I think we can get to the point where we're really using a much more significant percentage of plastic waste, as we call it, into secondary raw materials. And that's where we should all be thinking. And I know that probably some of you still have more questions to be asked. And as a result, we will get kicked out of this room. We can't stay here. But we can go down to the third floor. And if you have more questions or debate or discussion, we'll be there. And we can talk and have a further discussion. And that's down by, just by chance, the Veolia's charging station. So feel free to go there, charge your phone or computer, and ask some great questions. And we'll be looking forward to seeing some of you there. So thank you very much.
Thank you all for your attention and questions.